Welcome to this joint presentation of the Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools and the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. My name is Guy Levitt, and I'm the Director of Organizational and Consulting Services for the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. This session is part of a 9-part series of programs designed for school board charter school authorizers. This section is Section 7, Defining Performance and Accountability Standards. Charter school contract has to include a description of the educational program that the charter school intends to use for its students. The contract also needs to include what methods the school is going to use to help make sure that students are attaining their educational goals that have been set for them. And it also should include the methods that's going to be used to measure student progress toward meeting those goals. The role of the authorizer is to do the monitoring and making sure that the requirements set up are being carried out. The Center for Public Education has created a 4-quadrant grid called part of data first. And when we look at these 4 quadrants, the very first quadrant is collecting baseline data and set goals. And when we talk about baseline data, what we're looking at there is exactly that. Where are things right now? As an example, enrollment might be considered baseline data. You might look at environmental data such as discipline reports or surveys of how students and teachers feel about the school. That's considered baseline data. And once you've got your baseline set, then you're ready to start doing some progress monitoring. The next thing you've got to do is you've got to align your resources. And when we think about resource alignment, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, money and budget. You always start by looking at your fiscal resources and where are you spending your money, what kind of return are you getting on investments, and are those resources being equitably distributed. But resources is more than just money. As an example, in a normal school district, you spend 85% of your spending is on human resources. So you want to look at that and decide what kind of data do you want to collect in the area of human resources. And a third type of data you might be collecting is going to be facilities data. How much space does that charter school need? And does a charter have, for instance, up-to-date technology? So this quadrant here is going to be really telling you, are you putting your money where you need to be? That's the important part of that. The next thing you want to do is identify the programs and practices that are being used in the school. You need to look at the educational resources that are being used. What curriculum is available for students, and what supports are available for students, and are you producing learning gains from those? When we look at that type of data, we're actually looking at what's called leading indicators. And the fourth quadrant is monitoring progress or really assessing your outcomes. And what you're doing in that quadrant is you're really assessing, is it working? Are we getting the type of outcomes that we anticipated? You need to look at all 4 of these quadrants to get some meaningless data, because any one of them by itself doesn't really give you the whole picture. When you put it all together and you go through the whole data cycle, then you can decide whether you're moving forward or not. In the key works of school boards, you've got this these 5 segments surrounding student achievement, and the one segment there that's important for school boards is accountability. Looking at monitoring student achievement, looking beyond the test scores, and looking at environmental data, looking at safety data to make sure that you are coming up with not only well-educated students, but well-rounded students. When you collect baseline data, you are really looking at what's your current situation right now, and baseline data will help you to determine your focus. It'll help identify what indicators you want to be looking at and what kind of information you're going to need going forward. But baseline data is just a snapshot in time. Why do you want to collect data? Well, data is useful because it's accurate and it also is aligned with your goals. But when you're looking at collecting data, only measure those types of things that are going to help you make better decisions for the future. The major areas of focus on data is looking at student achievement. Are the students learning? Do you have some gains in proficiency? Are you seeing individual growth or improvement by students? What do your graduation rates look like? And what does college enrollment, as an example, look like? Some examples of student achievement data. Obviously, the first example I would point out would be student performance on the state required assessments, because these are assessments that the charter school is not exempt from. Another source of student achievement could be looking at, does a student have a personal learning plan, or, for example, does a student have a portfolio? Some schools might require that each school have a portfolio. You could collect some parent data by either doing a parent satisfaction survey or looking at parent-teacher conferences and feedback from those parent conferences, as well as parent and teacher evaluation of how the student is doing. Obviously, both the parent and the teacher have some information to share there. Additional data might be available from the student's self-evaluation. How does he or she feel they're doing? And of course, the final piece would be subject area and skill-based tests. You want to look at your enrollment, what's happening in enrollment, and generally in a charter school, enrollment is good. There tends to be waiting lists to get into charter schools, but you still need to look at that. You also need to look at what kind of a mix do you have in your charter school in terms of racial and ethnic backgrounds. Do you have any English language learners in that charter school? You also need to look at the learning environment, look at attendance, look at discipline, look at climate. These are all good sources of data that will tell you an awful lot about how that charter is performing. You need to develop goals and review data. You need to identify areas for improvement. You could do self-assessments. You could use stakeholder groups. You need to look at required initiatives, the state as well as federal requirements. And you could also be referring to a strategic plan as part of that process. Achievement data sets. In the Wisconsin Charter School program, schools are required, charter schools are required to collect data in the area of reading and math and science and social studies, arts, and career and technical education. You also would look at graduation rates as well as retention rates. This is just an example of how those data sets might be reported out, and this is a chart made available by the Center for Public Education. Student populations data sets you could look at enrollment, and again, we've talked about the subcategories under enrollments: race, social economic status, special education, poverty, disability, comparison of the school to the district, and you also might want to look at student mobility data. And again, the students' populations data, again, could be recorded in a fashion similar to what this chart from the Center for Public Education outlines. And finally, discipline and attendance data. Under discipline data, you may be looking at suspensions, you may be looking at expulsions, possible referrals, or even arrests. Under attendance data, you might be looking at not only student attendance, teacher attendance, but also looking at chronic attendance issues that may exist. And again, this environmental data can be collected on a chart similar to the one provided here by the Center for Public Education. You want to look at your baseline data, and what that's going to show is time spent is going to go, and it's going to show money that's being spent right now, and you want to define infrastructure requirements that align with charter school goals. So the school really needs to be sure of where they're heading. What financial resources is the charter authorizer going to provide to the charter school? And many times those financial resources, well, not many times, those financial resources are going to be spelled out in the contract, as well as any financial parameters, limitations, or requirements that are going to be set forth by the charter authorizer. In addition to financial resources, you also need to look at human resources. What kind of staffing is going to be required for the school? What are the requirements for teacher qualifications and for professional development? And if the charter is an instrumentality of the district, then that becomes a joint staffing decision between the Charter Governance Board and the authorizer. You also need to look at infrastructure issues, and there again, if it's an instrumentality of the district, it's possible that the district is providing physical space for that charter school, but also what other types of infrastructure, technology might be another example, is the authorizer providing to that charter school. The decision on what curriculum the charter school is going to use is really up to the Charter School Governance Board. That is not a decision made by the charter authorizer. The same thing with the support programs to be provided to students. That becomes part of the learning plan that the charter school has set up. It's not an authorizer function. However, what type of data the charter school is going to provide to the authorizer is generally built in as part of the contract, indicating what types of data does the authorizer want to see so that they can measure how successful that charter school is being. Monitoring progress is actually covered in Section 8 of this recording, so this concludes Section 7 of this recording.